for lack of a better reason, I just could not figure out what major to follow. So I ended up trying philosophy and a few other, psychology and a few other different majors, and ended up in film school somehow, and immediately gravitated towards the visual aspect of it, and that's cinematography.
Did you always feel like you had kind of an inherent gift for storytelling?
No, not per se. But I mean, I think that it's something that kind of came naturally to me. I mean, I'm not a writer, and I'm not a director. But I mean, I think, but symbolism and emotional response to, an artistic medium such as playing a musical instrument or taking a picture is something that, that I've been doing for a long time. And, attaching an emotional value to a certain, chord or, rhythmic phrase or thus, or, a shot composition is something that, something that I, wasn't really focused on, but definitely something that I've been practicing for a long time.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to me how I mean the best photography, whether it be still photography or filmmaking, I mean it brings out the most of the particular moment or particular scene that is being portrayed. And I look at what you did in college. If I have this correct, you studied both film cinematography and anthropology. Which is a fascinating and such a fitting duo of subjects to study.
Completely.
How did one complement the other for you?
Well, I mean, it's I would love to take credit and say I had this big grand plan in terms of my studies, but honestly, I just kind of followed what I was interested in and didn't really realize that the two could really affect one another. I've always been really fascinated with global politics, and specifically Middle Eastern global politics. And so that was my focus from an anthropological standpoint for my academics. But, in studying anthropology, you end up studying, all sorts of cultures. And, I'm very fascinated with people and what makes people tick. And what people, what people emotionally respond to. And it took me a while to even after becoming a cinematographer, it took me a minute to realize that was the playing ground that I had stumbled upon in my chosen medium of photography and cinematography. It's all about emotional connection, whether you're a documentarian or if you're trying to tell stories that move people like I am in films. It's all about, in the latter case, it's about having the audience connect with the emotional content on the screen. So in a really crazy turn of events, it's pretty handy to have a degree in anthropology, it turns out.
One of the most fascinating films on your resume actually speaks to your terrific interest in the Middle Eastern region. It's called The Black Tulip, and I remember a few years ago I interviewed Robert Richardson, and he had started out shooting kind of documentaries in war-torn regions, and I thought that was a fascinating way to start a career. But was it kind of equally as frightening a prospect for you to shoot the Black Tulip in that region? Was it shot during enormous conflict?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned Robert Richardson, starting as someone who gravitated towards conflict zones. It seems like a lot of cinematographers, myself included, have experience in these regions. I know, Chris Mingy started, very as a documentarian. I know Barry Ackroyd is, his strong suit, was documentary, and Roger Deakins. I mean, a lot of cinematographers, and a lot of the Hungarian guys, Vilmos Zsigmond, they all, a lot of these people photographed what was happening in their backyard, or sought it out. Yeah. I personally, I got my chance to go for the first time in 2009, and I shot the film The Black Tulip in Kabul in Afghanistan in 2009 at a really volatile time. So we just happened to be there when the elections between Karzai, the re-elections between Karzai and his opponent Abdullah had come out as fraudulent, and the UN were staging a runoff election. And so the minute I got there, the Taliban had announced that they were going to do everything they could to disrupt these elections. So yeah, it was a pretty volatile time to be over there, but a fascinating one for sure.
And you're shooting a narrative film. I mean, the Black Tulip.
Yeah, this is not.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This wasn't a documentary. This was actually a narrative film about taking place in Kabul. It's an Afghan movie. It was made by an Afghan American director, and it was 95% of the actors were Afghans, and it was in Bari, and it was a story about a family living with war in Kabul. So it made sense to film there from a thematic standpoint. It didn't make much sense to shoot there from a filmmaking standpoint, but the director was very sure about wanting to tell her story in her country with her people. So I respected that.
I mean, it's obvious what the relation is with the Black Tulip, but tell me on your other projects how important it is to establish a sense of place within the world that you're creating.
Well, that's just it. I mean, it's the world we're creating, not just me, but all the people in charge of the kind of visual nature of the film. I mean, obviously the director and the production designer and the cinematographer play a big role in that, but as do the costume designers and the prop masters, all these people. I mean, it's all we all have our role in creating a world for this script or this story to unfold. And so for me, it's very I'm in pre-production. I'm very involved with the mechanical aspect of things. I play a big role in the color theory in the film, and that's where I interact with the production designer a lot and with the costume designer. But but from a really immediate standpoint and on a shot by shot basis, the world I'm creating is something that is kind of happens in the space behind the actor's eyes, and it's really important for me to make sure that I'm emotionally connected with the intent of all the scenes, so that the viewer will be as well. Because that's really the currency I'm dealing, which is a subliminal kind of language that can influence the emotional impact of the story, that it'll have on the viewer.
Well, I'm sure it's a great challenge for any position on a filmmaking crew to be prepared to have a set idea of what you're going to do, but at the same time be flexible enough to move quickly on your feet should something else arise.
Well, something always does.
Yeah, I would imagine it never goes quite as planned. But was that a kind of a challenging learning curve that you develop over time?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I followed the path of least resistance into my career and basically went straight towards being the director of photography. I mean, I spent some time as an operator and some time as an electrician, and I was a lighting designer on a couple projects. But really, I jumped straight into it, into kind of a leading role. And so over the years, there definitely has been a learning curve into the process. And one thing that's really helped me is I started in indie film and shot quite a number of projects on very constrained budgets. And I think that when you're in that situation where there's no going over your schedule and going to a studio executive and saying we need 3 more days, it just doesn't exist. So you find ways to make sure that you're staying on schedule. And for me, I'm in a position that can make or break the schedule, because oftentimes, it's up to me how fast the whole scenario moves, with my lighting or with my, how I want to move the camera. A lot of times that requires a lot of people to put their heads together, and it can really it can take some time. So over the years, I've definitely come up with a style which adheres to the emotional content on the page, but also I can get through my day without, I can get through my day getting the amount of work allotted done,
Yeah. Well, in terms of style, this is something that's always interested me. Music video format allows you to be very experimental, and I know quite a lot of photographers apply that same level of experimentation into their films as well. But when it comes to narrative filmmaking, is it a challenge for you to establish a particular style and a freedom of experimentation, but at the same time not to allow it to sabotage the story?
Well, I think that in the conversation of music video style versus narrative feature film style, I think that on a music video you have an excess of poetic license, because your way of operating could be, listen, okay, we want Taylor Swift to look as good as humanly possible all the time, and that means just, it doesn't matter where the light's coming from. It doesn't matter if it's coming from a window or from the ceiling or from the ground, whatever. Just do it. Just make her look as good as possible, and I can respect that. In terms of telling a story on, so on a music video, the styles, it could be high key, no matter what. It always looks good. On, a story such as, The Black Tulip, or, a psychological thriller like The Boy Next Door, we're creating a world for the actors to be in. And so right there, you have a set of parameters which my lighting and shot composition and camera movement have to reside within. So in a lot of respects, the style is sort of dictated with the written word. Like we as artists, we're all interpreters. So when I read a script, I might interpret it a different way than Bob Richardson interprets it. But however we interpret it, we're applying a certain set of parameters to it. So once those parameters are kind of set, where I say, listen, this is a story about tension. This is a story about someone who made a really bad decision, and now she has to find a way to get out of it. That is our character arc, and it's about the tension that ensues because of this bad decision. That starts to dictate the decisions I make in terms of, well, how do I want to imply tension in this scene? Do I want the viewer to feel really disoriented? So maybe I'll shoot longer lenses and at a wide open f-stop, so the background is completely blurry, so it's as if the viewer doesn't have any peripheral vision. Or is it quite the opposite thing? I want them to notice everything in the room, and feel really tense because they now don't know what to focus on, and everything's in focus, and they actually have a wider field of view. It's things like that I can really dig into and start to play with on a subliminal level. So when it comes to deciding on a visual style, I mean, that's kind of how I choose my project.
Well, and on this latest film, I mean, you're working with a major movie star in Jennifer Lopez, and I would imagine that stars like her are very savvy about their relationship with the camera. So what is the level of engagement between you and the actor on set?
I like to engage the actors. I try and give them a lot of room, but I mean, what I'm doing is helping them get their performance across to an audience. So I've always had good relationships with actors, and in the case of Jennifer Lopez, I mean, she's been around for a long time, and she's very savvy. She understands lenses. She understands lighting. She understands, how she's going to look best or how she's not, Wow, she's not going to look best, and she's an artist, so she's willing to use that. So in this particular case, I mean, she and I had a very close relationship, so it's one of collaboration.
Yeah. So you're working in this film. You're working with Rob Cohen, who's a really good director. And when you guys met about this movie, tell me what those initial discussions were. What did you kind of want to bring to the material that was new and exciting for you?
Well, it's funny because when I first met with him, I went out to his house in Mel. I read the script and really liked it, and immediately knew that it was something that it was right for me. Had he called me for the Fast and the Furious, I don't know if that would have been the right movie for me. Just given my skill set. But on this, I mean, this definitely was crying out for that subliminal language we've been talking about. I mean, this is definitely an emotional movie with a lot of. I mean, there's definitely a lot of action. I mean, it's a signature Rob Cohen movie, but it's more of a character-based drama than I've seen him do. And so right there, I gravitated towards it. And he called me. I found out posthumously. I mean, he called me because of my lighting and my use of color. So my first meeting with him, actually, it's funny you brought up the anthropology side of things. That is something that we initially really bonded on because Rob is he went to Harvard and studied anthropology, and I kind of learned about him before we met, and so that was sort of our jumping off point. Is we really started talking about this music on the most broad, with the most broad strokes, and just kept on stroking finer and finer until we got to lining up a shot. So it was a really a very natural process, and he and I actually have a very similar sort of work ethic, and we kind of put the same foot forward. So we start talking about emotional connectivity and what Jennifer Lopez's character was going through, and what our antagonist was going through, and how are we going to get that on the screen, and then we started getting down to what colors are we going to apply to certain emotional states, and how are we going to build tension via lens perspective, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, you've made mention a couple of times of your preoccupation with color palette, and I'm curious with the progression of this story, how does that express itself with the colors?
Well, it's funny because Rob has been quoted as saying something really brilliant, where he said he really wanted to create this world in which really bad things happen on really beautiful days, and I took that very to heart. Color theory is so fascinating to me, and so really multifaceted, and it's something I've been working at for years, but I've only scratched the surface at it. I mean, cinematographers like Slawomir Edziak, who's probably one of my favorites, who is most widely known for shooting Black Hawk Down, but for me is my favorite work of his is the work he did on the Decalogue and Double Life of Veronique and Kieslowski's Blue. Or you look at someone like Storaro, who has written lengthy volumes on what the color yellow represents, and where I don't take it as far as Storaro does, saying yellow is this period, green is that period. I say it's how you can apply different colors to different things and have them mean symbolize different emotions or different aspects of an emotional character. But specifically with The Boy Next Door, Rob and I definitely started. We wanted to start with sort of an autumnal, very inviting color scheme, and so we started very orange and yellow, and we moved towards. We kind of wanted the film to start looking kind of more like a bruise, as the main character, Claire, Jennifer Lopez's character, is going through a divorce, and then she makes a bad decision, and now she's got this huge secret, and so it's almost as someone punches you in the arm really hard, and at first it's kind of red, and then the next day it's a little purple, and then by the end of it's black, by after a week, and so that was sort of the thought process with this, is that things would start to lean more towards like nights. Nights, instead of going blue, we went more magenta, and which was hard for me to do because I'm someone who I am a color theorist and I'm someone who uses that in my medium. I still always try and motivate it. So it's I always try and find a light source that's motivated, and it's hard to motivate purple at night without a neon sign, which we didn't have. But it was a challenge, and it's something that Rob and I really connected on immediately. So and back to the anthropology side, it's like the audience will connect with it.
Yeah,
or they're going to hate it. I don't know.
It's fascinating. I mean, because the artfulness of that kind of approach is it's in the very subtle way that it works itself into an audience's consciousness without them even realizing it.
Completely, yeah. And that's my role. I mean, that's my job. And and if I'm doing the right movies in my career, which knock on wood I will, I mean, that's always going to be the case. Even if they're cool looking movies or, they're exciting. I mean, it's the subliminal language that we're all dealing with. Whether Joe Schmo cinematographer knows it or not, they're affecting the viewer on a subliminal level. And it's like, it's every little decision you make, says something to the audience or coerces them in some way. So, that's the beauty of what I get to do for a living, is the fact that I get to mix. Not only do I get to mix things like shot composition and lens perspective and color and all these things, at the end of the day, my medium and then is mixed with other art forms such as costume design and sound design and a score. So if we're all thinking on the subliminal level, then you can really do great things.
Mm. I always close off my conversations with this question. It's kind of a fun question. You've actually already mentioned a couple of titles, but if you were to teach a film class on great cinematography and you were to pull 3 to 5 films or individual scenes, which ones would they be?
Well, I mean, I would definitely, one of the first people I would talk about is Sławomir Idziak, who, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's, I mentioned him earlier, but I find his career just completely brilliant because he's, of the Polish, cinematography school. And he, again, was another documentarian, although his work does not look very documentary, but he came up in the 70s and 80s, in Poland, working with, a number of directors, but most notably, Krzysztof Kieślowski. But, making these low-budget films in Poland with not a whole lot of resources, Sławomir Idziak was able to come up with these tools. And his biggest arrow in his quiver was his use of filtration. But he came up with these very inexpensive ways to manipulate his image. And he came up with these color schemes that really were quite effective and inexpensive. And so over the years, he moved up in the world as Kieślowski moved up into the trilogy in the early 90s, of which Idziak shot Blue. He still, even though the budgets got a little bigger, he still employed these same indie film tools that he came up with. And then years later, he Ridley Scott hired him to do Black Hawk Down. And you look at Black Hawk Down and you look at a short film about killing, which is, a very low budget, one piece of the Decalogue. And the two films look very similar. And I think that's brilliant. And I would definitely, as a teacher, I would inspire, I would hope to inspire, burgeoning filmmakers and cinematographers to look at this and to not be afraid to let kind of lack of resources influence your artistic endeavor, because a lot of times it's that breeding ground that really creates new and exciting artists.